It's got good bones. That's what the first contractor said when he came out to look at the place. It's got good bones. In other words, he planned on making a short-term career out of the farmhouse by rebuilding it from the studs up. I thanked him and promptly tossed his card in the trash. He sent me his quote a week later. It was more than my yearly salary. I thanked him again and moved on. 4 more contractors came out. They all said different versions of the same thing. It's got good bones. They all wanted me to sign over my firstborn, the deeds to the house of everyone in my contacts list, and a pint of blood every 3rd Wednesday after a full moon. I turned them all down, of course. I'm a librarian and don't have that kind of money. Also, I'm single, have no kids, don't know anyone who owns a house, and I can be squeamish when it comes to blood. Once I explained all that, the texts and emails stopped. Until last November, the day after Halloween. That's when I met Bridget Hanover. That's when my life changed forever.
Well, Mr. Stanton, the house has...
She began to say, but I stopped her with a raised hand.
Good bones,
I interjected.
Yeah, I've heard that one. Well, sure, yeah, it's got great bones,
she said.
But what I was going to say was that the house has a history, that's for sure. Oh, a history,
I responded.
Wait, what do you mean by that? What kind of history?
Bridget Hanover was a tall woman, maybe in her mid-50s like me. She could have been older too, but since I never asked, I never knew. She had blondish white hair pulled back in a ponytail that she kept tucked up inside a baseball cap. Wide-set, deep brown eyes, and despite the hooked nose, which after the initial shock I found rather cute, she'd have been referred to as a handsome woman. Bridget gave me that smile of hers, half knowing, half apologetic. I'd later come to know that smile well.
How long has your family been in the valley?
She asked me.
I have no idea,
I said.
I just moved here 2 years ago. On purpose?
She asked, and her smile widened.
For work,
I replied.
I'm the head librarian at Nearby Valley Public Library,
she said, finishing my sentence.
I've seen you there, Mr. Stanton.
Clem, please, I said.
Clem,
she said and nodded.
Bridget. Yep, it's on your card,
I said, and held up the white rectangle she'd handed me the second she'd stepped up to shake my hand on the porch.
It is,
she said and kept smiling. We were standing in the farmhouse's kitchen, which hadn't been updated since the 1950s or 40s.
40s,
Bridget said. I frowned at her. She shook her head.
I saw your eyes on the appliances, trying to work out how old they are. Everything in here is 1940s with the exception of the fridge. You could only get that color of green in the 1950s. So they'll all need to be replaced,
I said.
Jesus, why?
She said, still smiling.
Do you hear the fridge running? No,
I said.
Oh crap, I know the power is on. I had it turned on last... Don't worry, the power is on,
she said and flipped the switch onto the overhead light, then flicked it back off.
I'm saying keep the appliances. A fridge that old should be rattling its ass off and walking halfway across the kitchen. But it's not. It doesn't even have a hum. That damn thing purrs. So that's a good thing? I asked. A purring fridge? Yes, Clem, it is, she said, and ran a finger through the dust and dirt that coated the kitchen counters. She rubbed the dust between her fingers and then gave it a sniff. There was a fire here a couple decades back. The soot is coming out of hiding and drifting through the house as we speak. Do we need masks or something? I asked. No, we'll be fine, she said. Then I saw her smile slip. It was brief, and if I'd blinked, I would have missed it. But when something with that kind of wattage dims, you notice it. Something wrong? I asked her. She was looking at the door to the basement. How about I buy you lunch? She asked suddenly, making me jump a little. Buy me lunch? I responded. Why would you buy me lunch? Because you're about to hire me, and it's the least I can do, she said. Hire you? You haven't given me an estimate yet, I said. We'll go over all of that at lunch, she said.
Her brown eyes locked onto my green eyes.
Unless you have plans already? No,
I said with a chuckle.
no plans. Since I inherited this place, meeting with contractors has pretty much taken over my day off. You just get one day off?
She asked.
County budget cuts,
I said.
The library can't afford another part-time employee. You should ask for volunteers,
she said.
Everyone in this town has a duty to Nearby Valley.
Little did I know at the time how truly she believed that.
Liability,
I said.
I've already been through that with the county attorney. The liability insurance is through the roof if a full-time employee isn't present with the volunteer during their shift. Sort of defeats the point. Well, then you doubly deserve a lunch on me,
she said and walked out of the kitchen.
Come on, Clem.
I glanced at the basement door, then followed her out of the kitchen.
Why Nearby Valley?
Bridget asked around a mouthful of pastrami on rye as we sat in the corner booth at Hildy's Diner.
I'm sorry?
I replied, just before taking a bite of my club sandwich. She swallowed her bite and said,
What brought you to Nearby Valley? Work,
I said.
I got the head librarian position and... Yes, but why Nearby Valley?
She interrupted.
There are other places that need head librarians, sure. Why here? Give me specifics. I don't know,
I said.
I knew my family had roots here from way back. My great-aunt Flora lived here. Keep going,
she said and took a huge bite.
Flora died in May and left me the house and land,
I continued.
Is that why you moved here? Because you knew you'd get the place?
She asked. I couldn't tell what she was fishing for. Did she think I was some opportunist who moved to Nearby Valley to wait for my great-aunt to die so I could inherit a money pit? That'd make me a pretty bad opportunist.
You know what?
I said. I took my napkin off my lap and placed it on the table.
I have errands to run. Do me a favor and send me your estimate when you can. It was nice meeting you, Miss Hanover. Sit down, Clem,
she said and turned on that smile.
We aren't done. I think I am,
I said and started to walk away. Bridget's hand grabbed my wrist and stopped me in my tracks. Her grip was insanely strong, and if I'd kept going, she would have probably pulled my arm right out of its socket.
Sit down, Clem,
she said. When I turned to look in her face, she had that smile turned up to its full wattage, but it didn't reach her eyes.
Let go,
I said and took a look around. We missed the lunch rush, so it was just us, a couple of late lunchers, the waitress, and the cook in the back.
That house you inherited? It's worth more than a fortune, Clem,
Bridget said.
More than you can even imagine. Let go,
I said again.
I could, yes,
she responded, and her grip tightened.
Or you can sit down, and I can explain what you've gotten yourself into. Or, I guess, what your great-aunt Flora got you into by leaving you the family homestead. Let go,
I said one last time. To her credit, she did.
Thank you for lunch,
I said.
Send me that estimate when you can.
She casually picked some pastrami out of her teeth with the nail of her left pinky finger. Her eyes were on me the whole time.
I look forward to working together,
she said.
Yeah, sure, fine,
I said, and left the diner.
This was left for you,
Bobby said as she handed me a sticky note. She was the only other full-time librarian.
Thanks,
I said, taking the sticky note from her.
Who left it? What's-her-face set this on the checkout counter and told me to give it to you,
she replied.
Which I did, so now my job is done. What's-her-face?
I asked, studying the sticky note.
Huh, these look like reference numbers. I know,
Bobby replied.
But they aren't reference numbers for our system,
I continued.
The numbers are too high. Our section doesn't hold this many books. I know,
Bobby said again and shrugged.
I didn't write the list. What did she look like? The lady?
I asked Bobby.
She looked exactly like What's-Her-Face,
Bobby replied, snapping her fingers over and over. Then she stopped and pointed at me.
Bridget Hanover, that's who it was.
Bobby was a good 20 years younger than me. She'd been hired 3 years before me, but had no ambition of being head librarian. We got along fine except for the days when we didn't. A nearby valley native, she lived with her disabled mother out off State Highway 53, so it stood to reason she knew who Bridget Hanover was.
Oh, okay,
I said and crumpled up the sticky note. I tossed it over her head and missed the trash can behind her spectacularly.
You missed,
Bobby said.
How do you know? Your back is to the can,
I replied. She glanced over her shoulder, then back at me.
Yeah, you missed.
With a big, exaggerated sigh, she walked the 3 feet to the crumpled sticky note and tossed it into the trash can.
She said you'd do that.
Bobby said.
Who?
I asked.
Bridget Hanover,
she replied.
Are you high, Clem? Pay attention.
A couple of the library's patrons looked our way.
I'm not high,
I said loud enough for everyone to get the point.
and thank you for passing on the note.
Bobby shrugged and walked off into the stacks. I guess our conversation was done. I took my place behind the checkout counter and started going through the overdue list on the computer. Nearby Valley, including the county as a whole, had maybe 3,000 residents. So the overdue list was only 5 names long. 3 of those names got their first warning emails. The 4th got their second warning email. The 5th required a phone call.
Connie McKee?
I asked when a woman answered.
Yes.
She replied.
Clem Stanton from the nearby Valley Public Library calling,
I said.
Oh no, no.
The woman nearly shrieked.
I turned that book in. I turned it in.
Okay, you probably did.
I said, quite sure of the opposite.
But unfortunately, our system doesn't reflect that. Can you tell me when you returned the book?
Last year.
She said.
July, I think.
July? Of last year?
I asked.
I think we're talking about different books, Miss McKee. My call is regarding the copy of Mortimer Darcy's A Day in Spain. It was due a month ago.
Oh, right.
She said, sounding only slightly less anxious.
I had it in the car. It must have slipped between the seats. I'll bring it by this evening.
We close at 6,
I said.
I know.
She replied and hung up.
Goodbye to you too.
I said and placed the handset back on the cradle. I rubbed my face, then looked about the library. Bobby was watching me from the stacks, but she acted like she wasn't when I turned in her direction. It was only 10 in the morning and things had already gotten weird. By lunchtime, I'd checked in, barcoded, and covered the shipment of new hardcovers UPS dropped off. By early afternoon, I reset the displays on top of the young adult and the large print sections. By late afternoon, I told a group of teens to be quiet 5 times and a group of old men to be quiet 6 times. I take the teens any day. They only leave trash under their table. The old guys sometimes leave a little extra. But Mr. Lewis was wearing his adult diaper that day, so I had no hazardous material to remove from any of the chair seats. At almost closing, a woman in her late 60s or early 70s walked in and hurried up to the checkout counter. She slapped a paperback down in front of me, then gave me a hard stare.
It was between the seats,
She said.
Thank you, Miss McKee,
I said.
Sorry if I alarmed you this morning. No, it's fine.
She said, then waved her hand at me.
Check it in and tell me the fine.
She turned and looked around the library.
We close in 1 minute, so it's just us.
I said as I took the book and scanned it in.
No charge. No fees? Are you sure?
She asked.
Normally there would be, but we can let the $3.25 slide this time.
I said.
You said you'd bring it in before close, and you did, so thank you. Sure.
She said, still looking about.
Are you all right, Miss McKee?
I asked.
You look like you're expecting someone to show up. I'm fine,
She said and leaned across the counter.
You say we're alone? Yep,
I said, and turned away from her so I could set her returned book on the cart behind me. When I turned back, Miss McKee was hurrying away from the counter and sliding into the reference stacks.
Miss McKee?
I was about to follow her, but I saw the time on the clock and went to lock the front doors first. I didn't need any stragglers coming in when I should be closing up. I close, Bobby opens. She needed to be with her mother in the evenings. It's a good system.
Miss McKee?
I called again after locking the front doors. There was no response. Moving to the reference station, I checked each row, but there was no sign of Miss McKee.
Miss McKee? Connie?
I called out. Up and down the rows I went, thinking maybe she was standing at the end of a set of shelves and I just couldn't see her. But there was no one. What the hell? Then I heard the rattle of the front doors. It got louder and stronger with each second. I raced to the front and saw Miss McKee shoving and pulling at the front doors. She had a large, leather-bound book under one arm.
Miss McKee?
I asked as I approached her slowly. Without turning around to face me, her shoulders slumped and she took a couple of steps away from the doors.
I'm sorry,
she said and held the book out to me without turning around.
I just had to try. Here, take it and unlock the doors, please.
I took the book and scooted past her. She refused to look at me and kept her head down, her eyes staring at her feet. I unlocked the doors and she shoved them open before I could even take a step back. Her shoulder collided with me and I nearly lost my balance as she raced away from the library and to her car.
Have a good night,
I said as she got in and drove off, still without looking at me. The day started weird and the day ended weird. Except the day wasn't quite over for me. Neither was the weirdness. Not by a long shot. I locked back up and carried the book to the counter where I set it down while I finished checking the logs before I shut down the system. It drove Bobby nuts that I didn't just let the system sleep overnight. But I'd learned in my short time running the nearby Valley Public Library that the system needed a hard startup each morning, or there would be nothing but glitches all day long. Mr. Lewis and his pals called the glitches gremlins. Bobby called them ghosts in the machines. I called them a pain in the ass, hence the full shutdown each evening. Once that was finished, I picked up the large book and walked back to the reference stacks. Then I checked the catalog number on the spine and stopped.
This is too big of a number,
I said, reading the title from the spine out loud. Perkins' Complete Compendium of Demonology. I went to open the book when the lights above me dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed, then brightened, and finally went back to normal. The weirdness kept on rolling. With a glance up at the lights, I pivoted on my heel and went back to the checkout counter and the trash can sitting behind it. I set the leather-bound book down, then grabbed up the trash can. There was a good amount of trash in the can, including the remnants of Bobby's lunch, which I'd told her 100 times to dispose of in the backroom trash. She never does. Despite my hesitation due to the soggy bits of Bobby's sandwich on top, I knew I'd find the crumpled sticky notes somewhere underneath it. I retrieved it with only a smear of mustard on the edge of my right hand. The numbers on the sticky note were way too high, just like the book sitting on the counter. In fact, as I read the numbers a second time, I compared the note to the number printed on the spine of Perkins' Complete Compendium of Demonology. One of the numbers written on the sticky note matched the number on the spine. I turned the computer back on, waited for it to boot up, then began typing in the other numbers. None of them were in our catalog. I typed in the number for Perkins' Complete Compendium of Demonology. It wasn't in the system either. Except I could see the book right in front of me. And Miss McKee had found the book in the stacks. So I was off to the stacks again. I searched for close to 45 minutes before giving up. The books didn't exist in the system or on the shelves. But one of them existed because I was staring right at it when I returned to the counter. I shook my head, retrieved my backpack from behind the counter, grabbed up Perkins' Complete Compendium of Demonology, stuffed it in my pack, and left. I'd take out the trash in the morning. Or maybe Bobby would when she arrived. I wasn't going to hold my breath, though. The evening was dark and chilly, typical for a November night. Fallen brown and orange leaves were blown across the parking lot by a light breeze. A smell of coming rain was hinted at in the breeze. I reached my car, got in, and started it up. When I backed out of my parking spot, I caught the sight of a pickup truck parked in the far corner of the lot. I braked and turned my head for a better look. I must have been wrong. There was no pickup truck. There were no other vehicles at all. I shook my head and drove out of the empty parking lot. All I had in my fridge were leftovers. I heated some up, then plopped down at the kitchen table with Perkins' complete compendium of demonology in front of me. I hadn't taken more than 2 bites when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, so I let it go to voicemail. Even over the smell of my leftovers, I caught a distinct whiff of age wafting up from the book. It wasn't quite mildew, but it was close. There was also an underlying tang, as if the leather itself had spoiled just a bit. As I leaned in to get a better sniff, my phone rang again. Same number. Whoever they were, they hadn't left a message the first time.
Hello?
I said when I answered.
You got my note?
A woman said.
Miss Hanover?
I asked.
Bridget, please.
She replied.
You got my note?
I did.
I admitted.
And I have to say I'm more than a little confused.
Oh, and why's that, Clem?
She asked. I could hear that smile in her voice.
The library's reference section does not hold books with catalog numbers that high,
I said.
Yet you have one of the books right in front of you,
She said.
even though reference books aren't meant to be checked out.
How do you know I have it with me?
I snapped. I stood up from the table and went to the window over the sink. It was nearly pitch black outside with the rain clouds rolling in. I leaned over the sink and looked left, then looked right, but I couldn't see a thing out there. I closed the shade, then left the kitchen.
You haven't answered my question.
I said.
How do you know I have one of the books?
I saw you with it when you left the library.
She said.
No, you didn't.
I said.
It was in my backpack.
Did she laugh? I felt like I heard her laugh, except I couldn't be sure.
Lucky guess.
She said. I yanked the drapes shut in the living room, then went room by room to make sure all blinds, drapes, and curtains were also closed.
Meet me in the farmhouse in an hour.
Bridget said and hung up. I lowered my phone and stared at the screen. The woman was crazy if she thought I was going anywhere with the storm coming in. Not that I needed the weather as an excuse. That was an unsettling phone conversation, to say the least. Meeting Bridget Hanover at my late great-aunt's farmhouse at night was not in the cards. My stomach growled, and I returned to the kitchen and to my leftovers. And to the book, which was sitting open next to my plate. The first thing I did was check the kitchen door that led to the mudroom and then outside. It was locked. I left the kitchen once again and double-checked all the doors. They were locked. So were the windows. Returning to the kitchen, I saw that the book still lay wide open. I hadn't opened it. I approached the book slowly. It was silly, but I was afraid that if I moved too quickly, I'd startle the book. Like I said, it was silly. Scanning the contents of the pages that faced me, I realized I was out of my depth. It looked like the book was written in Latin, but I knew enough Latin that I should have recognized at least a couple of phrases. But I couldn't even recognize any of the words, let alone whole sentences. Then the book slammed shut. I screamed and fell backward, tripping over my own feet as I scrambled away from the table. A sharp jolt of pain shot through my tailbone as my ass hit the tile floor. I could just see the corner of the book's spine from my seat on the kitchen floor. Even seeing that much of the thing made my blood run cold. The book had closed itself. It wasn't a gust of wind because I just made sure every door and window were shut and locked. I didn't have a ceiling fan on because it was November. The book closed itself. I saw that happen. My phone chimed with an incoming text. I patted my pockets, then realized I had set my phone down on the table, right next to my cold plate of leftovers. Right next to the self-closing book. Shit. To say it took all of my willpower to get off that kitchen floor and retrieve my phone would have been an understatement. Keeping my distance from the book, I skirted around the table, grabbed my phone, and then retreated as fast as I could to the living room. "Bring the book," the text from Bridget said. "I'm not meeting you at the farmhouse," I texted back. "Yes, you are," was her reply. "No, I'm not," was my reply to her. I had several exclamation points at the end of my message, just so there was no misunderstanding. When I drove down the farmhouse's long, gravel driveway, Bridget's pickup truck was already there. The rain had started on the drive over, and now it was coming down hard. I snagged the book off the passenger seat, opened my door, and raced through the rain and up onto the front porch.
I told you you were coming.
Bridget said from an old rocking chair tucked in the corner of the porch.
Fucking hell.
I snapped and nearly threw the book at her.
Oh, best not use that word here,
she said. She stood up and went to the front door. She opened it easily, even though I was positive I'd locked it the last time I'd been at the house.
Come on,
she said. I need to show you something. I held up the book and shook it at her.
What is this?
I asked.
A book,
she said. Her smile was the brightest thing in the gloomy, rainy night. She held up a hand to stop my obvious protest.
Sorry, I couldn't help it. Come inside. Once I show you what you need to see, then you'll get the explanations you're looking for.
I didn't budge. She watched me closely, then shook her head.
You came all this way,
she said.
Why? For answers.
I snapped and shook the book again.
And I'm going to give you answers,
she said.
So stop acting like a scared kindergartner and come inside.
She walked away, leaving the door open for me. I clenched my fist, not holding the book, and slammed it against my thigh a couple of times in frustration. Then I stepped over the threshold and followed her into my great-aunt's house. I found Bridget in the kitchen, standing next to the basement door.
Have you been down there yet?
She asked.
The basement? Sure, a couple of times,
I said.
No, you haven't,
she said.
Excuse me?
I replied.
I used to come here as a kid. My mom would bring me, before she died. I'm sure I've been down in the basement before. The cellar,
Bridget corrected.
It's not a basement, trust me. A basement has boxes of holiday decorations, a ping pong table, unused exercise equipment and crap like that. Trust me, none of that is down there. Basement, cellar, what's the difference?
I asked.
In this house, there's a big difference,
she said. Then she produced a set of keys. She sifted through them until she found the one she was looking for, the one that unlocked the basement door.
How do you have that?
I asked.
I don't even have a copy. Exactly,
she said.
That's one reason I know you haven't been down there. What are the other reasons?
I asked.
You're still sane,
she said. Then she turned the knob, opened the door, and that smile left her face.
I'll go first.
She reached through the doorway and found a light switch. Although, after she flicked it, there didn't seem to be any change in lighting on those basement stairs. Bridget did as she said she would and went first. I almost immediately lost sight of her, so I hurried over to the open door and peered down the stairs. I could just make out her in the middle of the stairs. It took more than a couple of deep breaths and some internal confidence boosting before I set a toe on the top step. But as they say, the first step is always the hardest. I followed Bridget down into the basement. She was standing in the middle of the dirt floor with a single, very dim light bulb hanging above her.
Do you smell it?
She asked in a quiet voice. I took a sniff and frowned.
I smell rodent piss,
I responded.
Try again,
she said. I took another sniff and recoiled.
Did something die down here?
I asked. She didn't respond.
I think I smell rotting meat,
I said.
But it's not heavy. At least, not like a dead deer on the side of the road in the middle of August heavy. More like a mouse has died in your AC ducts. It's not mice or any rodents,
Bridget said.
Keep trying. Try for what?
I asked.
To identify the smell,
she said.
But I just told you.
I stopped and took a deep breath. It wasn't the greatest breath to take, that's for sure. But I was finally able to identify the smell.
Blood?
I asked. Bridget was about to respond, but she cocked her head slightly and held up a hand instead.
What is going...
I started to ask, but she shushed me.
Shh. Hand me the book,
she said, and held her hand out behind her. I hesitated. Not that I really wanted to keep holding the book, because I didn't. It freaked me out, obviously. But for some reason, at that moment, I felt like the book was protection, like a totem or something. The feeling made no sense, but then not a lot had made sense that entire day. I gave Bridget the book.
Don't move,
she said.
Stay right where you are so I know it's you. What the hell does that mean?
I asked.
I told you, it wasn't a good idea to say that word. That goes doubly true down here,
she said.
So don't, like, ever. Which word? Huh?
She shushed me again before I could finish the word.
Shh, do not move,
she reiterated.
Not moving,
I said, and crossed my arms over my chest.
Let me know when you want to start explaining what the heck, what is going on. It's easier if I show you,
she said and opened the book. In a low voice, she began to read out loud. I couldn't understand anything she said at first, but after a minute or two of listening to what I thought was nonsense, I started to understand what Bridget was saying.
Of the great many layers, let only the topmost reveal itself,
Bridget said.
Only what has been planted will be seen. Those below shall remain below. This is the command.
The light bulb above us exploded.
Do not move,
Bridget hissed, predicting my sudden desire to bolt up the stairs and straight out of the house. Bridget pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. She closed the book and held it out to me.
Take it,
she said when I didn't move.
And do not let it out of your grip, no matter what happens or what you see.
That earlier feeling like the book held some sort of protection returned, and I gladly took the book from her. With Perkins' complete compendium of demonology no longer in her hands, Bridget focused on shining her flashlight around the cellar's dirt floor. She swept the light back and forth, then stopped on a spot in the far left corner.
One of them is coming,
she said, and stepped closer to the corner.
Come on, stay close. Keep behind me and stay quiet, and you should be fine.
I had a million questions to ask, so staying quiet didn't seem possible. But as I saw the dirt floor shift in that far corner, any words I may have wanted to say died in my throat, because a hand was poking through the dirt, and it didn't look human. Yes, it had 4 fingers and a thumb, but this hand was dark green, scaly even. Long talons extended from each finger, and it looked like bone spurs were sticking out from each knuckle. And between the fingers was thick webbing, like a duck's foot, except very much not like a duck's foot. No, definitely not human. I wanted to ask Bridget a trillion questions, but I was stunned. I was scared, and I was curious. The hand coming out of the dirt was joined by another one. In seconds, the hands had dug enough of the cellar dirt away that the crown of a green, scaly skull could be seen. Then a pair of massive eyes, black and glassy, appeared. They did not blink, even as dirt dropped off the top of the thing's head and slid over those eyes. Bridget said something, but I couldn't quite hear her words. Her tone had changed. She sounded commanding, insistent. The thing cocked its head and nodded. Then it lowered itself back into the hole, and the hands and head were gone. Bridget stood stock still. I did the same. It felt like a good idea. After what had to be a year and a half, or maybe only 15 minutes, Bridget slowly backed toward me. When she reached me, she held her hand out, and I instinctively took it. Then she led me to the stairs and back up into the old kitchen. When the cellar door was closed and locked, Bridget let out a long breath.
Okay, it's not as bad as I thought,
she said.
Oh, good,
I responded, unsure of what else to say in a moment like that.
But it's not good,
she added.
Oh,
I said.
What does that mean? It means we need drinks, and I need to explain a few things,
she said.
Let's get out of here. Yes, to all of that,
I said, and happily followed her out of the house and into the storm. I pulled up next to Bridget's pickup truck and parked outside Farley's Roadhouse Saloon. I wouldn't have called it a roadhouse or a saloon. It was 4 shipping containers that had been renovated and combined into a classy little speakeasy type of bar and lounge. When a misguided business went under, Farley Morrison bought the place and turned it into his roadside saloon. The inside was a mishmash of different decors. Everything from the Roadhouse Saloon style to that previous speakeasy aesthetic to whatever stuff Farley could scrounge from dumpsters and the landfill. I could swear that a couple of the booths still smelled like a landfill.
Grab that table in the corner and I'll get the drinks,
Bridget said. She headed to the bar before I could tell her what I wanted. With the book in my hands, I went to the designated table and took a seat. I surveyed the place and recognized several faces. I couldn't remember their names, but I knew them from library events and just seeing them around town. Despite having some roots in the area and working as a public employee, I wasn't exactly welcomed with open arms in nearby Valley. Ever since the day I arrived, folks had been friendly yet distant, very distant. Bridget set down 2 pints of dark beer on the table, then sat down.
Put the book away,
she said and nodded at Perkins' complete compendium of demonology. Without argument or inquiry, I slid the book off the table and set it next to me on the booth seat.
There are 2 types of folk that live in nearby Valley,
Bridget said, after taking a sip from her beer.
The first type are the ones that have been here since before the place was ever named Nearby Valley. I'm talking about bloodlines as old as the mountains to the east. Families that are of this land in ways you can't imagine. Did I see one of them tonight?
I asked. Bridget stared at me over the rim of her pint glass as she took a long drink. Then she lowered the glass and her bright smile returned for the first time that evening.
Good guess,
she said.
But you are only partly right. What you saw is what happens to the first type when they have been called to serve. When called, people in these parts go through a change.
That was a person down in the cellar?
I asked.
Not anymore, no,
she said.
But it doesn't mean they don't deserve our respect. They have a tough job to do. If they make it to the change, that is.
What's that mean?
I asked, and finally sipped from my glass.
Service isn't for the weak,
Bridget said.
You give up your humanity and live in a sort of perpetual sleep under the earth for, well, forever, I guess.
You're saying that people here in Nearby Valley turn into those things, then crawl under the dirt and live that way forever?
I took another sip, then shook my head.
Okay, sure, fine.
They don't just crawl under the dirt,
Bridget said.
They only crawl under the dirt in your great-aunt's cellar. Or, I guess, your cellar now.
I'm sorry, what?
I responded.
That cellar is the key to keeping all of humanity safe,
Bridget said.
Which is why you'll be hiring me to get that farmhouse back into fighting shape.
She took another sip of her beer and closed her eyes. That smile faded as she shook her head.
What's below is getting stronger, and the servants need help,
Bridget said, when she finally opened her eyes and fixed them on me.
How do we help?
I asked, then laughed at how casual those words sounded coming out of my mouth. Bridget's smile returned.
We need more servants,
she said. The scrape of chairs was loud enough to be heard over the jukebox in the corner. Bridget straightened up and looked over her shoulder.
Shit,
she said when she turned back to me.
I must still be spooked a little. I didn't see them sitting over there. Who?
I asked, leaning around Bridget for a better look.
The Catskills,
Bridget said.
Are they coming over here?
Yeah,
I said, and in seconds, 4 very large men, ranging in age from late 20s to mid-30s, walked up to our table. They were dressed in flannel shirts, jeans, and work boots. Each had bushy beards and baseball caps on. A fairly normal look for Nearby Valley. I'd seen a couple of them around town. Not in the library, though. They didn't look like library folk. It was easy to see the resemblance between them. Large eyes, pointed noses, big ears, but there was something else that seemed to connect them, and I couldn't put my finger on it. It wasn't a resemblance in their looks, but more like a resemblance in their vibe. They gave off a sadness, a dangerous sadness.
Hanover,
The first man to reach the table said.
you hanging out with nerdy librarians now?
Looks like it, Mac.
Bridget replied without looking up at the man. The others joined Mac Caskill and stood behind him, all of their eyes on me while Mac focused on Bridget.
What you doing out this late with the storm blowing?
Mac asked.
Having a pint or two, Mac.
Bridget replied.
That a problem?
Oh, you know the problem.
Mac said, then he turned his attention on me.
Outsiders.
I looked from Bridget to Mac, to the other Caskills behind Mac, and back to Bridget.
Me?
I asked.
You.
Mac said.
He's not an outsider, Mac.
Bridget said.
His blood flows in this valley as much as yours does.
But he ain't from here, is what I'm saying.
Mac insisted.
He didn't grow up here. He hasn't learned what it takes to be a part of nearby valley.
Bridget swiveled in her seat, then stood up and got right in Mac's face.
And you do?
She asked.
Because from what I'm hearing, the Caskills are the loudest of the bunch calling for change. Because we are done being servants.
Mac said.
Not backing down from Bridget.
And can you blame us?
Mac looked directly at me.
Especially now that we have this sad sack overseeing things.
I don't know what that means.
I said.
Oversee what?
You haven't told him?
Mac barked out a harsh laugh. I could feel the sad vibe in the Roadhouse saloon thicken.
I was getting to that, but some idiot interrupted me.
Bridget said, then placed a hand on Mac's chest.
Go home, Mac. Let the adults handle the hard work.
To my utter surprise, Mac took a swing at Bridget. My second surprise was Bridget ducking under the swing and punching Mac right in the balls. The big guy crumpled like all his bones had turned to sand. Bridget turned her attention to the other Caskills. They lurched at her, but a loud clang from the bar froze the action in its tracks.
No fighting!
The bartender shouted. He held an aluminum bat in his hands.
Take it outside and down the street. I don't need your shit tonight, Caskills. Same with you, Hanover.
Sorry, Bill.
Bridget said.
Tell Farley it won't happen again.
The Caskills helped their brother or cousin or whatever Mac was to them up off the floor. He looked sickly, and his eyes swam in his head. Bridget must have really nailed him hard. We watched the Caskills leave, then Bridget downed her pint and grabbed us 2 more beers, even though I hadn't finished my first.
Bill will let us finish talking,
Bridget said.
but we need to make it quick. He called Farley to let him know about the trouble, and Farley wants us gone. Bill's doing me a favor.
What type is Farley?
I asked.
Like us.
Bridget said.
He stays above the dirt.
If the ones that go below the dirt are servants, then are we like their masters?
I asked.
God, no.
Bridget replied with a shake of her head and a bitter laugh.
We're the custodians.
Custodians?
I echoed.
We keep things running and clean up the messes.
She said.
Speaking of, we're gonna have to make a mess of that farmhouse.
Strip it to the studs mess?
I asked. Despite all the insanity I'd witnessed, my brain immediately switched gears and wanted to think Bridget was just as much of a scammer as the rest of the contractors.
No, not that drastic.
Bridget said.
But we will need to run new conduit and also add a good foot or 2 of fresh dirt to that cellar floor. I'm thinking maybe a surveillance system so you don't have to mind the cellar 24/7.
Mind the cellar? What does that mean?
I asked.
That Mac guy called me the overseer. Is that what you're talking about?
Unfortunately, yes.
Bridget said.
Just like your great aunt. Your job is to make sure the servants do their jobs and keep what's below from coming up.
What is below? What is this all about?
I asked. I finished my first beer and drained half of the second one before Bridget answered me.
Hell.
She said quietly.
Hell?
I asked.
Hell.
She said.
That farmhouse is built over a portal that leads directly to hell. Without the servants guarding the portal, or us custodians keeping things running up top, we'd be knee-deep in demons here in nearby valley.
Oh.
I said, staring at her for a solid minute.
You aren't joking, are you?
Did anything that has happened tonight feel like a joke to you, Clem?
She asked, then nodded.
Finish the rest of your beer. We're leaving.
I finished the rest of my beer, then grabbed the book as Bridget stood up.
Where are we going?
I asked.
My place.
She said.
What for?
I asked.
What do you think, Clem?
She answered, and her smile returned.
Oh, well, yeah, sure, okay.
I stammered.
You really know how to make a woman feel special, Clem.
Bridget said. We left and went to her place.
Someone had a night, I see.
Bobby said with a smirk when I walked into the library the next morning.
Did you even go home last night? Briefly.
I said, as I set my backpack behind the counter and took a couple of deep breaths.
Okay, so I'm gonna let the fact you didn't take out the trash last night go because I want the gossip,
she said as her smirk grew.
So, who's the lucky lady? Oh, wait, my bad. I'm assuming it was a lady. It was a lady, and I don't kiss and tell,
I said.
2 large coffees.
Bridget said as she burst through the library doors with a to-go cup in each hand.
I figured you'd need more after last night.
Bobby looked from Bridget to me to Bridget, then burst out laughing. One of the elderly patrons shushed her immediately.
Don't shush me,
Bobby snapped.
I work here. Hey, Bobby.
Bridget said as she set the 2 coffees down on the counter.
How's your mom? She now has gout.
Bobby says.
Because apparently that's still a thing. I thought only old misers from 1800s London got gout. Sorry to hear that.
Bridget replied and tapped one of the coffees, then pointed at Bobby.
This one's for you. Thanks, Bridge,
Bobby said. She picked up the coffee, took a sip, smiled, then continued, looking back and forth between Bridget and myself.
What?
I asked.
Get your mind out of the gutter. We're all adults here. What?
Bobby replied.
I'm not thinking about that. Jesus, no. I don't want those images in my head. Then what's with the look?
I asked.
You finally tell him?
Bobby asked Bridget.
Yep,
Bridget said with a nod.
I filled him in on everything last night. That's why I'm here. Thank God,
Bobby said.
After Connie McKee came in last night and nearly spilled it all, I thought I'd be the one doing the explaining. Nope,
Bridget said.
You just get to do the fun part. Wait, how do you know Miss McKee came in last night?
I asked Bobby.
Small town, Clem.
She replied.
And it's my job to keep tabs on potential servants. You're a custodian?
I asked, surprised.
Bobby's in charge of the custodians,
Bridget said.
just like her mom used to be. Hold on. Bobby's in charge of the custodians?
I asked.
I thought I was. You know, being the overseer and all. God, no.
Bobby said, then frowned at Bridget.
I thought you told him everything. Everything except exactly what he is.
Bridget said.
I figured, with Clem being a librarian, the books themselves would do a better job of explaining it. So, you chickened out.
Bobby stated.
I didn't want to completely break his brain.
Bridget said.
Clem had already seen a lot, and the bullshit with the Caskills didn't help things. Caskills? I hadn't heard that.
Bobby whistled.
Who'd you run into? Mac and his brothers.
Bridget said.
At Farley's. I see.
Bobby said. The frown left and was replaced by the smirk.
Stopped in for a couple of pre-game pints? You know me, Bobby.
Bridget said as she struggled to keep her smile from beaming too much.
I'm not sure what I'm more freaked out about.
I said.
What I saw in that cellar, what Bridget told me, or you two bonding over my embarrassment. Suck it up, Buttercup,
Bobby said, and patted me on the arm.
Come on, you got library stuff to learn. I have a doctorate in library sciences.
I said.
I did my learning. She's going to show you the reference room.
Bridget said.
We don't have a reference room.
I said.
We have 2 stacks and that's it. Oh, he's so cute when he's confused.
Bobby said.
No wonder you couldn't resist, Bridge. This whole conversation is getting very uncomfortable.
I said.
It's about to get a lot more uncomfortable,
Bobby said, and her smirk was gone.
Follow me, Clem. Time for you to get a real education and finally do the job you were brought here to do.
Bridget slapped Perkins' complete compendium of demonology against my chest.
Bring that,
she said, then walked away from the counter and into the stacks.
What is going on?
I asked, as Bobby walked off after Bridget.
You'll see,
she said.
Come on.
I did. I did see. And now that I know what I know, I'd rather I hadn't. I stood at a door that I knew for a fact hadn't been there before.
You have to turn the handle if you want to go in,
Bobby said.
That's how doors work.
Thanks.
I said, and opened the door. Inside was a room about the size of a large reading room. There was a long, mahogany table in the center of the room and a single bookshelf on the wall at the far end. On that shelf were exactly 11 books with the space in the middle for a 12th book. I looked at the book in my hands and knew that it would fit that slot perfectly.
What is this?
I asked.
The reference room,
Bobby replied. She pointed at the bookshelf.
There are 12 books that live in this room. We need all 12 to keep our town safe. To keep everyone safe,
Bridget said.
Go have a look.
I did. The books were as old or even older than the one I held in my hands. They were bound in leather, bound in cloth, bound in something like rough animal hide, which is much different than leather, trust me. If there were names on the spines, they were impossible to read, except for two.
The Book of Dirt?
I asked.
You'll need to read that one,
Bobby said and reached past me to pluck the book from the shelf.
You can put the Perkins on the shelf. It did what it needed to do,
Bridget said.
For now.
Bobby handed me the Book of Dirt as soon as I shelved the Perkins book. Then she pulled down the other book that had a legible name.
Overseer?
I asked when Bobby placed the book on top of the Book of Dirt. They were both way heavier than books should be.
That one you need to memorize,
Bridget said.
Have a seat and start reading.
I looked about the room.
Now? In here?
I asked.
Yes, now.
Bridget replied.
And yes, in here. But I have work to do,
I said.
The library is closing early,
Bobby said.
It's not even noon,
I protested.
People will understand,
Bridget said.
Bobby, on it,
Bobby said and left the room. After a couple of seconds, I heard the rattle of the front doors as Bobby locked them. I sat down and opened the Book of Dirt first. Most of it was incomprehensible. There was a lot about tending the soil, which was understandable considering the book's title. But there was a lot about keeping the plantings fed and healthy. It didn't go into detail on what the plantings were exactly, but after the night I had, I could make a guess. The Book of Dirt wasn't a thick book, and the pages were filled mostly with detailed illustrations, so I was able to read through it in no time. Or that's what I thought.
Dinner,
Bridget said with a greasy paper bag in her hands.
Dinner?
I asked, surprised. I checked my phone. I'd been reading the book for 5 hours.
What the hell?
I clamped a hand over my mouth.
It's okay,
she said.
If you say that word anywhere in this town, this room is the safest. Oh, good,
I said and swallowed hard. That makes me feel much better.
There are reasons this room is hidden,
Bridget said.
One reason is for its own protection. The other is, people can get lost in these books.
She set the greasy paper bag down on the table in front of me.
Hildy's double cheeseburger with double bacon and extra pickles. Hold the onions.
How did you know that's what I order?
I asked.
I told her, moron.
Bobby said as she came into the reference room with 2 more greasy paper bags.
What did you think? That she'd been spying on you? Would I be crazy to think that considering?
I said and waved a hand at the room.
Not at all.
Bridget said as she sat down and pulled her food out of one of the bags.
Because I have been spying on you.
I paused mid-bite.
I'm sorry, what?
I asked.
I have been spying on you.
Bridget said.
A good chunk of the town has, Clem. Ever since you got here. We had to know if you could take your great-aunt's place as overseer. If you couldn't cut it, then we were going to need to scramble fast. So we had to be sure.
Oh,
I said and set my burger down. I wasn't so hungry anymore.
Eat,
Bridget said. It sounded more like a command than a suggestion.
I will,
I said and reached out to grab the overseer book. Bridget slapped her hand on the book and held it in place.
Eat first,
she said.
You'll need your strength for this one.
She wasn't kidding. When I was done eating, Bridget slid the book to me. Her eyes were locked on me as I opened the book and read the first page.
Holy shit,
I whispered. I looked up at Bridget, shaken.
Is this for real? Yes,
Bridget replied. I continued to read. Bobby came in and cleared out the dinner trash, then set a six-pack on the table. She cracked open a beer and said,
ready to throw up yet?
What?
I asked, tearing my eyes away from the impossible words.
Why would I throw up?
Bridget and Bobby shared a look. Then Bobby shrugged and took a 20 out of her pocket. She handed it to Bridget.
Told ya.
Bridget said, pocketing the 20. We all drank beer as I continued to read. The things I read in that book, everything started to make sense, and things took on a new light.
This is a lot to put on a person,
I said to Bridget.
Yup,
She agreed.
that's why we try to keep it in your family. Your bloodline hasn't let us down yet. Shit!
Bobby yelled from out in the stacks. Before Bridget and I could get up, Bobby rushed into the reference room.
Connie McKee just called.
She said, her eyes wide with panic.
She got to the farmhouse and saw the Catskills trucks in the driveway. Then she saw them going back and forth from their trucks to the house. They were carrying tools. What sort of tools?
Bridget asked.
Shovels, pickaxes, post hole diggers.
Bobby said.
She even thought two of them were carrying a jackhammer. Those assholes.
Bridget said as she got up.
I knew they were going to pull some shit.
What shit? What's happening?
I asked.
The Catskills have been the largest servant family in nearby valley.
Bridget said.
You heard Mac last night. They don't want to be anymore. So now they're going to try to do something very stupid.
That's not how it works.
I said, and patted the cover of The Overseer.
No, it's not.
Bridget said and smiled at me. Then she smiled at Bobby.
I'm surprised to say it, but he may be ready.
If you say so.
Bobby said.
Ready for what?
I asked.
Your first planting.
Bridget said. When Bridget slowed her pickup truck at the end of the driveway, Connie McKee got out of her Volkswagen Beetle that she'd been sitting in across the street. There were enough trees in the way to block her from being seen from the house. Still, she'd been right out in the open, so I had to wonder whether or not the Catskills knew they'd been discovered.
You've been warned multiple times, Connie.
Bridget snapped, rolling down her window when Connie approached the truck.
No visiting. It was his birthday last week.
Connie said.
I just wanted to sing him a song.
Whose birthday?
I asked.
My son's.
Connie said.
He was planted 3 years ago.
Bridget said.
You met him the other night.
Oh, okay.
I said. Bobby leaned in from the back seat.
Have you heard anything? Any noises? Not yet.
Connie said.
They took a long time carrying all of them tools in. We may not be too late.
Bridget said.
Connie, go home. No more visits, all right? Clem is taking over, so you'll have to answer to him the next time you try. You're the new overseer.
Connie stated, then nodded.
Okay. Sorry. But thanks for calling and giving us a heads up.
Bobby said.
Of course.
Connie said.
We each have a piece in keeping the whole safe. That we do.
Bridget said.
Good night, Connie. Night.
Connie said to Bridget and Bobby. Then she looked me square in the face.
Good night, overseer.
Good night,
I replied. When she left, we got out of the pickup truck, crossed the road, and walked slowly down the driveway. The sun had set a while ago and a damp chill had settled over nearby valley. The house was dark when we got close enough to see it well. I couldn't hear anything, but then again, the cellar was fairly well insulated.
Here.
Bridget said, and handed me something she pulled out from inside of her jacket.
This is yours.
I took the object and studied it. I didn't need to ask what it was for. I'd read about it in the book. I placed the object inside my own coat.
Thanks,
I said. Hearing the doubt in my voice, Bridget stopped walking and grabbed my arm.
You good, Clem?
She asked.
If we get in there and you freeze, I won't.
I said.
But if you do...
She left the sentence hanging there.
I won't,
I insisted.
I read the book. I know what I'm here for. Good man,
Bobby said, and slapped me on the shoulder as she moved past us to the porch steps. In her other hand was a revolver. I don't know guns, so I couldn't say what it was except that it was big.
What the fuck is that for?
I asked.
Keeping your ass safe while you do your thing.
Bobby said.
Trust me, The Catskills will be packing too.
Packing? When did you become a character in a crime novel? I asked.
Wrong genre, Clem.
Bobby said as she grabbed the knob to the front door.
This is pure horror.
Then she opened the door and went inside. Bridget and I followed right behind. There were muddy boot prints all down the entryway. That ticked me off. The place may have needed a ton of work, but it was mine. It was my family's. The disrespect hit a nerve.
I hear something,
I said and moved past Bridget and Bobby. I went straight into the kitchen and stood there at the open cellar door. Down below were voices talking and tools being used. Bridget and Bobby came up behind me and we listened.
If they bite you,
Someone said.
don't cry for help. You're already dead. I'm gonna smash their fucking teeth in before any of the freaks can bite me.
Someone responded.
Some of them freaks are your kin.
A voice snapped. That had to be Mac Caskill. I could tell by the asshole in his voice.
We put them all down with respect, just in case one of them is a cousin or uncle.
Mac said.
I'll respect them with this.
Someone said, and there was a loud whack followed by nervous laughter.
Don't fuck with me, Danny.
Mac said. Anything else that was said was instantly lost to the noise of a jackhammer starting up. Bobby tapped me on the shoulder, then slid past me and descended the stairs. She had the revolver down at her side, pressed close to her right thigh so no one could see it easily. Bridget placed her hand on the small of my back, and I put my foot on the top step. Once again, the first step is always the hardest. I followed Bobby into the cellar. When we got to the bottom of the stairs, we were lucky to find the 5 Caskills with their backs to us. I could have shouted and set off fireworks, and they wouldn't have been able to hear me over the jackhammer.
Stop them!
Bridget said to me, her mouth pressed right against my ear.
You have to do this!
Before I could move, a screech erupted from the dirt, loud enough to not only be heard over the jackhammer, but loud enough that I needed to put my hands over my ears.
Got one!
The Caskills shouted as the jackhammer was shut off.
Help me drag it out!
The Caskills pounced like cats on a gopher, and in seconds they had pulled a servant up out of the cellar floor. The creature was humanoid. It had those huge, black eyes and was covered in thick, slick, scaled skin. The webbed hands slapped at the Caskills as they dragged the servant into the middle of the cellar. It screeched and writhed, but it wasn't strong enough to fight off the 5 large men.
What the fuck?
A Caskill said when we were finally spotted.
Mac?
Mac, who had been busy pinning the servant's shoulders to the ground, looked over his shoulder at us.
This ain't none of your business, Hanover.
Mac said with a snarl.
You may think you're in charge, but you ain't. So you can take your nerd boy and the lesbian back up those stairs and get the fuck gone.
Lesbian?
Bobby said.
Just because I wouldn't go out with you doesn't mean I'm gay, Mac. It just means I have self-respect and decent taste. Let him go.
Bridget said.
Him? How the fuck can you even tell?
Mac asked. He did let go of the servant's shoulders, but one of his brothers took his place. The servant's unblinking black eyes fixed on me as the creature was held down. Knowing what the thing had to endure in order to keep us all safe, I couldn't help but feel for it. I wondered at that moment if I would feel the same way about the Caskills. Probably not in the beginning. Maybe later.
What's that you got there?
Mac asked Bobby as he spotted the revolver.
Insurance.
Bobby said. Mac slid the bottom of his coat to the side so he could show us the butt of his own revolver.
Well, ain't that a coincidence?
He said with a laugh.
You even know how to use that thing, little girl?
We've known each other since preschool, Mac.
Bobby said as she lifted the revolver and pointed it at Mac's head.
What do you think?
The tension in the cellar was intense, broken only by the short screeches and yelps the servants uttered every few seconds.
Let's calm down,
I said, putting myself between Mac and Bobby.
No need for anyone to get shot.
Oh, how sweet.
Mac said.
The library nerd is trying to play peacemaker.
He took a step closer to me, and I held my hand out at Bobby so she didn't shoot. Mac's eyes flitted to Bobby, then focused back on me.
This is why outsiders like you suck,
Mac said to me.
It takes a local to understand just how fucked up all this shit is.
My family has been part of nearby Valley.
I started to say.
My family has been part. My family has been part.
Mac interrupted in a mocking voice.
Your family has been nothing but motherfuckers. treating the rest of us like we work for you or something. Well, we're tired of this shit. We're gonna destroy this cellar so no Catskill is forced to be a servant ever again.
If you do that, then you destroy us all,
Bridget said.
Says you.
Mac replied.
No, it's true.
I said.
I read the books. Without the servants, without this cellar, the portal to hell will be wide open, and humanity will be fucked.
Oh, you read it in your books, did you, library nerd?
Mac asked, getting in close enough that our noses almost touched.
Fuck you, and fuck your books. Let us just kill them, Mac.
One of his kin said.
Fucking try it.
Bobby snarled. Her revolver turned to the group of Catskills.
But there's no need for anyone to get shot, right, library nerd?
Mac asked me.
Isn't that what you said?
It is,
I replied. I slowly slid the object out of my coat. Mac was so focused on intimidating me that he didn't even notice.
There is no need at all for anyone to get shot.
I twisted my wrist and shoved the dagger into Mac's belly. Mac oofed and stumbled back, his hands clutching the dagger's handle. He looked down at his belly and the blood pouring out around the dagger. Then he looked up at me and all the macho bullshit was gone from his eyes. All I could see was a scared little boy. A scared little boy who had been told stories his whole life. Stories about his family and their fate. Stories about the cellar. Stories about how one day they'd all come to live in the cellar. Mac just hadn't realized that his day had come. Bobby leaped in front of me, but I held up a hand.
No,
I said.
you know how it has to be done. Clem has to do it.
Bridget said. Bobby backed off. The rest of the Catskill had no idea what to do. The brains of the group was quickly bleeding out from a huge ceremonial dagger having been shoved through his guts. Whatever brain cells the rest shared were frying out quickly. I moved in close and yanked the dagger free from Mac's belly. He fell to his knees as a waterfall of blood spilled out onto the cellar's dirt floor. He looked up at me with pleading eyes. I put the dagger through one of those eyes, then I pulled it out and slashed across Mac's throat just to be sure. His body slumped to the side, and his blood soaked into the dirt. It wasn't until the servant moaned with hunger at the sight and smell of all that blood that the rest of the Catskill sprang into action. Well, sprang would be too generous a word. Stirred might be better. They let the servant go and stared down at Mac's body. Then they looked up at me.
Sorry,
I said as I rushed them. Now, this would be the point where I describe how I suddenly was able to move swiftly through the Catskills, slicing and stabbing with the dagger until they were all bleeding out on the cellar floor. But being the overseer didn't mean I suddenly had ninja powers. Not even close. As the servant crawled to Mac's body to lap up the blood still spurting from his neck, the Catskill picked up shovels and pickaxes and crowbars and came at me. I took a hit to the left shoulder from a shovel and was instantly on my knees. But I was able to slash with the dagger and drop the Catskill that had hit me. I'm pretty sure I hit his femoral artery because he was almost dead by the time he fell to the floor. A crowbar almost took my head off, but I threw myself to the dirt just as it was swung at me. I didn't get out of the way of the second swing, and the back of my right calf exploded with pain. I rolled onto my back and did what I could, which was blindly swing the dagger in all directions. A shovel hit my stomach. I cried out, but then felt the dagger connect with someone. A pickaxe split the dirt right next to my head. But again, I managed to slice someone else. Whoever had tried to nail me with the pickaxe should have stepped back instead of trying to pry it out of the dirt. A shadow fell across me and I looked up to see a post hole digger raised right above my face. Then it came for me. I managed to roll to the side, but couldn't go far since the pickaxe was still there, close to my head. But it was enough to keep me from being decapitated. Although, I did lose a little hair and skin on the back of my scalp. Hands pulled me up off the floor, and I almost jammed the dagger into Bobby's chest.
Oh shit, sorry.
I said. Bobby shrugged and pushed me to the side so Bridget could step forward.
That's enough.
Bridget said. Her words weren't loud, definitely not even close to a shout, but they held power, and the Catskills froze where they stood, their eyes on her.
You all know what you were here for.
Bridget said.
It ain't fair.
One of the Catskills yelled.
No, it's not.
Bridget said.
But we all do our parts. pieces of the hole,
Bobby said. The Catskills looked nervous and scared. I couldn't blame them. All over the cellar, the dirt was being disturbed as planted servants clawed their way up to the surface, drawn by the meals I had provided. The remaining brothers moved into a tight clump as the servants tore their kin's corpses apart. The creatures lapped up the blood that had been spilled, then took the body parts they'd harvested and crawled back into their holes.
I don't want to be like them,
A Catskill said. He was keeping weight off his left leg, and I could see the bottom half of his jeans was soaked in blood. He was probably the one who had tried to get me with the pickaxe. Yeah, he really should have gotten out of the way.
It isn't up to you,
Bridget said.
just like it isn't up to Clem here. He didn't ask to be the overseer, but that's the fate of his bloodline, just like being servants is the fate of yours.
Sorry,
I said. Then I recited the first passage I read in the Overseer book. The Catskills fell to their knees, their hands clamped over their ears. Out of the corner of my eyes, I could see Bobby and Bridget backing away toward the stairs. But I didn't need them. I knew what my job was. I continued to recite the passages I had memorized as the Catskills writhed and hissed on the dirt floor. They tried to beg me to stop, but soon their mouths couldn't form the words anymore. When I finished with my recitations, the Catskills were no longer Catskills. Their transformations were complete. They were servants of the cellar. I sighed as I looked at the shovels and pickaxes that lay there on the cellar floor. I wished I'd brought some gloves. The Catskills had had some on, but they all tore when their hands changed. Gloves couldn't hold those talons, and the webbing between their fingers forced the shredded gloves to fall right off. I'd know to bring gloves next time. The Book of Dirt had said that the Overseer must dig the servants' first holes for them. This established the proper bond between the Overseer and the servants, so there wouldn't be any unfortunate accidents later when the servants grew hungry. And they would grow hungry. And I, unfortunately, would be the one to feed them. With blisters oozing from my palms and fingers, I walked up the stairs and into the farmhouse kitchen where Bridget and Bobby were waiting for me.
I have a first aid kit in my truck.
Bridget said.
I'll get it,
Bobby said and quickly left the kitchen. Bridget smiled at me, but the smile didn't stay for very long.
You all right, Clem?
She asked me as I stood there in the kitchen, my clothes covered in dirt and blood.
About as good as can be expected,
I said.
Do you have a list?
She studied me for a minute, then nodded. She pulled the list out of her back pocket and handed it to me. On the list were the names of neighbors and acquaintances. Townsfolk I knew from checking books out to them at the library. People I had passed pleasantries with at Hildy's Diner. After reading through the list, I tucked it into my own pocket, then held out my hand.
You don't need the other list,
Bridget said.
They'll be brought here when they are needed.
I want to see the names,
I said, my hand still held out. After a few seconds, Bridget nodded and produced a second list. She hesitated, then finally gave it to me.
They aren't to know,
She said.
Of course not,
I said as I studied the list. More names I knew, more townsfolk I had spoken to at Hildy's or checked out books to at the library. There were singles and entire families on the list. I folded it up, but didn't put it in my pocket with the other list.
You lied to me,
I said to Bridget. She stiffened, and I gave her a smile.
Relax. I know you did it because I wouldn't have understood then.
Bridget didn't reply. She just kept watching me.
When you took me to Farley's, you knew the Catskills would be there.
I said.
You knew Mac would pick up on me being the next in line as Overseer, and you knew it would piss him off.
Mac's been pissed off for a long time,
Bridget said.
I'm sure he has,
I responded.
Knowing your fate is to be a servant can do that to you.
I sighed and shook my head.
But that's not what you lied to me about,
I said. Bridget frowned, her eyebrows raised.
No. What you lied to me about was that there are two types of people in Nearby Valley.
I said.
There are way more than two types.
She nodded, but stayed silent.
There are folks like the Catskills, destined to be servants.
I continued.
There are folks like you and me, who are here to maintain the order of the portal and to administer to the servants.
Her eyes were locked onto mine.
There are also folks that aren't supposed to be servants and aren't supposed to be administrators,
I said.
just regular folks that help keep nearby valley running, like a normal town should. I didn't mention them because they are just that, Clem.
Bridget said.
Normal. I'm not talking about them,
I said.
No. The people you didn't tell me about are that fourth type. Not servants, not administrators, not normal.
I could see in her eyes that she finally understood. It broke my heart that fear crept into those beautiful eyes.
The fourth type of folks are destined to be food. Right, Bridget?
She nodded, and the fear in her eyes grew. Then she looked at the dagger I still held. I hadn't realized I had kept a hold of it while I was reading the lists. I shrugged and tucked it back inside my coat, my bloody, dirty coat.
Oh, shit,
I said.
Sorry. That must have freaked you out.
Bridget relaxed, and her huge smile returned.
I thought you were going to...
She started to say, then shook her head.
Never mind. You thought what?
I asked.
Well, you were talking about the folks that are food, and how you thought I lied to you and you still had the dagger and...
I stopped her words as I moved in close and gave her a quick kiss.
Chill,
I said.
You're administration just like me. We're good, okay? Okay.
She said as her body shuddered.
Phew. You had me there. I know,
I said.
Sorry. I had to have a little fun. Well, I think several rounds of drinks at Farley sounds way more fun,
she said. She glanced past me at the cellar door.
We good down there?
We're good down there,
I said.
Great,
she said and started to leave the kitchen. I grabbed her arm and winced at the pain from the blisters and spun her around.
But just so we're clear,
I said, not unkindly.
Don't ever lie to me again, okay?
Her smile slipped from her face as I walked past her and out of the house.
Oh, and Bridget?
I called back over my shoulder.
When you start work on the place, make sure you don't disturb the good bones, especially the ones in the cellar. Cute, asshole!
She called out, but I could hear the smile in her voice return.
I think you mean cute overseer,
I said, and walked to the pickup truck where Bobby was waiting with the first aid kit. Come on, keeping hell at bay makes me thirsty. Let's go get us those drinks at Farley's. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out some more of my episodes here.